think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
I don't know about where you guys are. It's like a wind tunnel this morning. We're welcome to the program. A lot of wind out there where I am in Little Rock. We're broadcasting live from the Answer Studios, 101.1 The Answer FM, and we are so glad that they are hosting us as we are in the middle of our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly, what goes on here at the Marble Palace in your name. And, boy, we have a lot to get to, and really, really excited about it. Now, let's just start with what happened yesterday, shall we? Yesterday in the Senate chamber, and if you saw the Facebook Live video yesterday where we gave you an update pretty much right after this happened, you'll know that the governor's tax cut plan, Asa Hutchinson's tax cut plan, a clean bill, as it's called, a standalone tax cut for your income taxes, moving it from 6.9 to 5.9 over 2 years, the top bracket. It passed. They ran it again, and they passed. It got the 3/4 required vote that it needed 27 votes. I think it got to 28 or 29. Now, how did they do this? They did this by getting the Democrats to vote for it. You see, the first time they ran this bill, the only Democrat they got was Senator Larry Teague, which I predicted for you. I pretty much predicted that that's what would happen. Senator Larry Teague would, in fact, be the guy that they would go to get a solid Democrat vote. Well, turns out, folks, it was also, believe it or not, they were also, they get 3 Democrat votes now. And so they were able to get to the 27 votes they needed. Senator Terry Rice voted yes. He didn't vote the day before, but he did vote yes. And Senator Bill Sample was not there yesterday, so he didn't vote either. So, this idea that they were going to be negotiating on highway funds, trying to get some sort of highway bill, at least that's what Talk Business reported that Bill Sample was doing, seems to, not much negotiation if you can get the Democrats to vote for your bill. I mean, that kind of destroys your leverage. Folks, you found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we are building a liberty machine. We are so glad that you're with us. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, I'm going to be talking once again with Dr. Warren Farrell. Dr. Farrell came on the program a couple of weeks ago. It might even come on the program before Christmas. I can't really remember, but it was a fantastic interview. He's the author of a book called The Boy Crisis. How do we save our boys? Talking about how, they're being told constantly that they're the problem. Specifically, I sat down with him earlier in the week. We recorded this interview, and it is certainly relevant today in light of the Covington High School boys, specifically Mr. Sandman, suing 54 media outlets for libel or slander. Very difficult to prove libel and slander in court, but I think he's got a great opportunity here. These people have got to pay for trying to destroy this kid's life just because they hate Donald Trump, just because he was caught white while wearing a Make America Great Again hat. So that's pretty interesting. We talked about the Covington High School boys with Dr. Farrell, as well as really we got into some fascinating discussion about our culture, about the differences between men and women. Can you even say that anymore, that men and women are different? Speaking of men and women being different, have you heard about this? Headline, USA powerlifting bans all trans women from competing as women. Now, It seems to me that women think that maybe testosterone is a competitive advantage. Could that be it? J.C. Cooper won a state women's title after being barred from competing as a woman at USA powerlifting events. This is, let's see. J.C. Cooper celebrates her U.S. Powerlifting Association win. USA Powerlifting has banned all transgender women from competing as women. See, I'm confused. I'm pretty much confused by that. A trans woman has applied. Let's see. From here. Even as a trans powerlifter in Minnesota recently won a state championship with another association, setting a state record. Oh, so is that a man then? Is that a biological man that sets a record as a transgender woman powerlifting? No surprise there. No surprise there. J.C. Cooper, a trans woman, had applied last year to compete in the recent USA powerlifting event in Minnesota. In December, her application was denied. Male to female transgenders are not allowed to compete as females in our static strength sports, as it is a direct competition or competitive advantage. Oh, you can't say that. Are you telling me that men generally are stronger than women? Oh, no. I feel sorry for the USA Powerlifting Organization. Let me tell you that. Oh, no. They even talk about bone density. Listen to this. Male to female transgenders are not allowed. Transgender male to female individuals have gone through male puberty, confer an unfair competitive advantage over non-transgender females due to increased bone density and muscle mass. Oh my goodness. And exposure to testosterone. Oh no, that is, you can't even say that anymore. I mean, we've got to continue to say it because it's the truth, right? It's biology. They like to say, the leftists like to say that we're the science deniers, but I beg to differ here. Now, check this out. You know how I've been saying this for a long time, by the way. I have been saying that migrants, immigration in general, is a consistent problem in developed countries. Now, this is frustrating to me. I mean, I don't understand why. No one will pick up on this. But the fact of the matter is that that immigration is a problem all over the world in terms of, whether you're in Great Britain, whether you're, in France, and there are people living in their country, who've lived there for generations that are noticing that their countries are having some immigration problems, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. For those of you that don't think globalism is a real thing, well, first of all, of course it is. But if you don't think globalism is a threat, then how come every single developed country is essentially having the same problems, which is immigration into their country? I mean, it's a huge issue here that's been ignored for a very, very long time. It's becoming an issue there. But to me, that just is a threat of consistency. Well, over in Europe, there were migrants that pushed 3 16-year-old Germans in front of a train. And according to Voice for Europe, the mainstream media covered it up. See, in many ways, there's an embargo on the truth. Our media has an embargo on the truth, and so does the international media when it comes to Europe and when it comes to, when it comes to the policies of the leaders. Like, hey, come on in our country, no big deal. Are you from a violent, war-torn area of the world? Come on into our country. We're sure the trail of blood won't materialize in our country. We're sure it won't. Anything that exposes them as being less than compassionate for their citizens. That's exactly what they don't want that news reported at all. German mainstream media spoke deceitfully of Germans in order to cloak a migration background. 3 young boys were pushed into the rails. 2 of them were run over by the oncoming train and killed. So that's what's going on. I mean, I can show you headlines about what's going on in America when it comes to illegal immigrants coming into this country who shouldn't be here. Again, this is a threat of consistency. They're dealing with the same problems over there that we're dealing with over here. And now for the third national news story of the morning. And this one is extremely disturbing to me personally. I didn't believe it at first. So remember the Planned Parenthood scandal where Planned Parenthood was selling baby body parts, and they were negotiating about what kind of price they could get over lunch and a nice glass of Chardonnay. Do you remember this? Okay. Well, so apparently, the outrage was, this is disgusting. They say it's just a clump of cells, or they say it's not really a baby, but yet the parts of the baby are valuable, and they're saying that they're more valuable than the baby itself. Well, baby body parts are apparently still valuable. And here in the United States, and this is from the Sun, the United Kingdom newspaper, abortion clinics have been supplying researchers in the United States with terminated fetuses, the baby body parts, that are then fused with rodents as part of a bid to stamp out disease and save millions of people. It's been deemed or dubbed the Frankenstein experiments. So they take baby body parts. Now, this is what they're doing. Let me tell you exactly what they're doing. They take a mouse or a rodent of some kind, and they irradiate the mouse, and essentially, with the radiation destroys the mouse's immune system. They then take aborted baby organs like the thymus gland or the liver, and they infuse that into the mice or the mouse. And so they claim that once that happens, the mouse develops a human immune system and is then ready for testing potential human drugs. That's what they say. Okay. This is horrifying on so many levels. And let me tell you, I mean, come on, let's just call it what it is. We would rather these babies die so that we can potentially live longer. Isn't that what we're doing here? They're wanting to experiment on drugs that can save millions of lives, but we got to kill our babies to do it. We got to. Now, speaking of that, let me give you some good news. Senator Jason Rapert, Arkansas State Senator Jason Rapert yesterday did an amazing job, not just for his district, but for the people of the state of Arkansas. And I was in the room. I was in public health. He ran a pro-life bill that is called an abortion trigger law. Other states have done this. Everyone is anticipating Roe versus Wade being overturned in this country. And when it is overturned, it would be nice if Arkansas law just goes back to the way it used to be, and we can regulate abortions, i.e., basically, prevent abortions unless the life of the mother is at risk. And I want to tell you, it was a heavy room, but it was like something. It was a milestone. It was like, the pinnacle of what so many of us have been working for so long. When you go back to think about when Arkansas wasn't a pro-life state, where we didn't have leaders that were pro-life, where they said it was just a clump of cells, and to go from there to public health, the Senate Public Health Committee. We're going to show you the video at 7 of Senator Rapert and the questions that were asked. It passed out of committee. Now, it's still got a long way to go, but I think with the makeup of Republicans down there, this is not going to have any problem. There were cheers. There were two ladies who are medical students and lab coats that spoke against it, saying that basically, hey, I mean, I just thought, well, here's two people that want to perform abortions in the future on women. That was never brought up, but they were respectful of their points of view, saying women need access to abortions and everything else. But it was amazing. That's all I can tell you. And I'll talk more about it later. But I will tell you this, people talk about Russia, They're so worried about Russia, right? Russia has holidays where they encourage their families to stay at home and make babies. And we kill ours, like 60 million since 1973. You want to be scared of Russia? That's a legitimate reason to be scared of Russia, not this other nonsense. We're going to take a break. This is Conduit News Radio. Back in a moment.
Are you tired of having to fight the crowds at mega
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Yesterday, we read for you a fantastic op-ed in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette about the importance of school choice, and now's the time to get it done, by Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin. And I wanted to bring in now, we have Dr. Patrick Wolf is on the line. You've heard from Patrick before. He is a distinguished professor of education policy and a 21st century endowed chair in school choice in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas College of Education and Health Profession. Dr. Patrick Wolf, it's good to have you on again, sir.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Did you read and were you encouraged by Lieutenant Governor's Tim Griffin's op-ed?
Let's face it, times are tough for the Arkansas General Assembly. They're all waiting for the spotlight exposing public corruption to end, so they won't be under so much scrutiny. And during this time, what if you're a legislator and you need money? What if you're slapped with a huge expense? What if your check for consultant services is late this month? Or maybe you just need extra cash now until payday. When that happens, you can't wait. Hi, I'm Bobby Blackmail for the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank, your trusted source to over 135 lenders to get you short-term cash fast. Use the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank today, and you can have up to $12,500 cash in your checking account tomorrow. Dried-up bribes no longer coming from Medicaid entities? Handled. Extra cash until your hopeful acquittal? Done. And you'll be surprised at how easy it is to get extra cash. Just be an elected official and be comfortable with the status quo, and we'll connect you with a fellow legislator who is ready to loan. It's quick and easy. And don't worry if you can't make the payments, because the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank is designed to help you get through these tough economic times. There are other ways you can pay off your debt, like by voting the way the establishment wants, or by rewarding some with committee chairmanships. So forget about overdraft fees and the spirit of covetousness that sometimes overwhelms the best of lawmakers. Just remember, the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank for short-term cash between colleagues when you need it fast.
Some transactions have long-term consequences.
Paul Harrell, parody.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
So there was also more news from the Capitol yesterday. Not only did Jason Rapert pass his abortion trigger law out of the, I really call it an anti-abortion trigger law, out of the Senate Public Health. You also had, I think on the Senate side, the campus free speech bill passed out of that committee. Over on the House side, you had the Convention of States bill passing out of the House committee yesterday as well. I don't know. Is that the closest it's ever gotten to the resolution for Convention of States? Is that the closest it's ever gotten? It might have gotten this close last year and then failed in the House floor. I can't remember, but that's going to be an interesting debate for sure. Also, coming up today at the Marble Palace, a resolution by State Representative Brand Smith to declare that Arkansas is a constitutional carry state, citing the court decision and precedent, Taft versus the state of Arkansas, which is really powerful court case that upholds everything the Patriots of Act 746 has been saying for 5 years now. And so we will be covering that. I will be in the room just because I'm interested to hear what the debate is. I know Mr. Tim Loggins, we talked to yesterday, is supposed to be here in Little Rock offering testimony in support of the resolution. So hopefully that will happen. We're going to get to the huge pro-life victory coming up at 7 o'clock. Coming up at the bottom of this hour, 6:33, we'll be talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. It's always great to talk to him. Considering the fact these Covington high school kids are suing 54 media outlets, I think it's a big deal. And we talked a little bit about that. Also, just again, if you I'm sorry, my headphones are deciding to mess up. I thought the microphone was messed up earlier, but apparently my headphones. Good. It's not the mic. So if you're just joining us yesterday, the governor's standalone tax cut plan was run for a second time and passed the full Senate body, getting the 3/4 majority required for tax legislation. This is a straight and simple, straightforward income tax cut. It is a good bill, and I am just thrilled to death that it is a standalone bill. Yeah, that's a good thing. Anytime you get a standalone bill, a clean bill like that, that's what you want. Especially when we're talking about cutting taxes. This is the reason that you send somebody. This is the very reason that we send people down there. It's like one of the main reasons that we have elections is we're discussing why or how you tax the people. How do you fund government? And so it's really good if that's the main reason. I mean, we've debated tax policy. In America there are pretty much two schools of thought now with tax policy. More money in your pocket is a good thing for the economy and, for what you want to do. And then there's the other school of thought, which is pretty much, let's throw all of our money into one big pot, divide it up equally, and become socialists. Oh, right. President Trump says we will never be a socialist country. How about that? Forcing Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to stand up and clap for it. Only Chuck Schumer walked it back the next day. Chuck Schumer saying, well, there's an argument over how much government interference should be in somebody's life. Oh, you know what else happened yesterday at the Marble Palace? Senator Bart Hester passed his bill, SB 170. This is a really good bill. I really appreciated the debate. This was a bill to allow an individual to build what they want on their property without the cities getting in the way saying, oh, it doesn't look right. And, it's just ridiculous, especially if you're somebody who's low income and you want to build a house and the city's like, you can't build that. You got to have these kind of shingles. It's like, no, pretty sure private property, by the way, in Arkansas, with the Arkansas Constitution, and Senator Mark Johnson said this, it is considered to be the right above all rights here in the state of Arkansas, is the right of private property. Did you know this? It's pretty incredible. But Senator Flowers rose and spoke against the bill, saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that sometimes people don't know what's good for themselves, and the government, meaning the city governments, need to step in to take care of them and, to tell them what's good for them. I couldn't believe she said that, but she did. Again, that's one of the arguments, or, that's one of the schools of thought when it comes to how we govern ourselves. It's one that I reject. It's one that I think most of you reject. Anyway, Senator Bart Hester, after a long debate and sometimes kind of a boring debate, when the Democrats got up and spoke, it was just like, come on. But it did pass. And again, this would be a bill to allow a private property owner to build what they want to build. And all of a sudden, some of the Democrats, like Keith Ingram, he got up and he was like, well, we should let the local governments, it's like, well, now the Democrats are for local government, excuse me. And by the way, that ignores the entire point of cities. Cities exist because the state allows them to exist, by the way. Did you know that? Yeah, that's in the Constitution as well.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Yesterday, we read for you a fantastic op-ed in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette about the importance of school choice, and now's the time to get it done, by Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin. And I wanted to bring in now, we have Dr. Patrick Wolf is on the line. You've heard from Patrick before. He is a distinguished professor of education policy and a 21st century endowed chair in school choice in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas College of Education and Health Profession. Dr. Patrick Wolf, it's good to have you on again, sir.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Did you read and were you encouraged by Lieutenant Governor's Tim Griffin's op-ed in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette? I mean, I thought it was really straightforward and really a challenge with and an opportunity of things that we can get done.
Yeah, I thought it was a very strong piece. You know, it highlighted the fact that parents are first educators. They want and need to be in control of their child's education. And when they have more options, they have more of an ability to match their child to the school that's going to best meet their kids' needs.
So last night, the President of the United States, in his State of the Union address, he referenced school choice. This is something that when I first heard of it, it was a very bipartisan issue. Is it still a bipartisan issue, or is it less so at this point?
It's less so at the national level. There isn't much support from congressional Democrats for parental school choice, but at the state and local level, school choice always has been and continues to be generally a bipartisan issue with support from both sides of the aisle. So,
and that's fantastic. I think Arkansas has got a great chance. Right now we're in the middle of our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly. 2 years ago, we weren't as successful. There was a plan. State Representative Jim Dotson had a bill, to allow some scholarships, some funds, allow for organizations to be charitable to fund these scholarships. But of course, we had some arguments from the status quo school district superintendents that they thought this was going to hurt them, and those are the arguments. Are those the arguments in other states? Because I know that you are you're a resource that people all across the country use for school choice.
Yeah, I mean, there are 54 programs.
Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Like last time, it was it's pretty good. Who knows? Maybe it's an idea in its infancy.
There we go. Right?
So listen, the reason I want to have you on, and I'm glad we could schedule you. We have not talked since this situation happened at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial between the Covington High School boy and this Native American Nathan Phillips and what happened. I've got one headline here. Kentucky town reels from fallout over viral National Mall face-off. The actual town where Covington Catholic School for Boys is Park Hills, Kentucky. And basically, this entire community has been, really involuntarily pushed into this national debate on, what's racist and what's not racist. What was your reaction to those events, Dr. Farrell?
my main reaction was seeing how overall the boys handled themselves beautifully, and if it was, and we were talking about how the boys were attacked because they wore MAGA hats or they were white or whatever, but no one pointed out that if those were girls, I doubt the attacks would be significant on them. They were really restraining themselves, and I think part of the reason for the attacks is that it's boys doing it, and so therefore the boys are blamed. And if they happen to be conservative, that magnifies the blame. And so it's part of the whole era now that we're in. Of the hashtag Me Too was completely focused on what males who were misbehaved did to women. There was no focus on the firefighters that are risking their lives all over the country, saving homes from being burned down, and being away from their families for months at a time. This is the core of what masculinity is about. Every single generation has had its war, and every single generation has sent thousands to millions of men to die in those wars, and we're not acknowledging that. We're not acknowledging the fact that those homes that were at the risk of being burned down were built by men who are construction workers who die at the rate of 1 per workday hour in the United States every single workday. And the Gillette ad, of course, is critiquing men without saying anything positive, and the American Psychological Association is critiquing men without saying anything positive. And so we're in this whole era where since the Boy Crisis book came out, I've gotten maybe 300 or 400 letters from fathers and mothers saying that my son is now in 7th grade and he's being taught by teachers of the toxicity of masculinity and how how boys are just filled with male power and male privilege, and they're sexist, and he just comes home feeling like, I feel like I was born with the wrong gender, and that I'm being blamed before I'm even being listened to. And part of toxicity of masculinity, it's explained, is not expressing his feelings. So I do encourage him to talk up and say what he's feeling, and so he does talk up. And then he's told, he's just mansplaining, and so he feels like he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. And other parents write me their children a little bit older, and they say, my son has a lot of interest now in women, but he's afraid to ask women out because if he moves too quickly, he's considered a sexual harasser. If he doesn't move quickly enough, he's considered a wimp, and he's just confused.
Do you think all of this is really about destroying the family at all? Because if men can't be women, if men can't be men, like who they are, if there's something wrong with who they are naturally, isn't that like trying to completely reshape what is the normal family unit?
Well, first of all, the key problem to when I did the research for the Boy Crisis, I tried to identify 10 causes, I ended up with about 10 causes, but the more I researched, the more I saw that the single biggest common denominator among boys in all 63 of the largest developed nations, all of whom have boys falling behind girls in every single academic subject, that the common denominator of the boys who were in boy crisis mode was dad deprivation. I looked at the studies of the ISIS recruits. They are almost all dad-deprived boys. I looked at studies I studied myself the backgrounds of the mass shooters, almost all dad-deprived boys. I went to Washington, D.C., studied the prison system, and found that it was not just that 93% of the prisoners are males, but that more than 90% of those males are dad-deprived boys. When boys don't have fathers involved with them in a significant way, when the intact family is broken down, that's when the nation falls apart, and it's costing us billions and trillions of dollars, to say nothing of the fears we have about the next mass shooting, the next ISIS problem. And so this is the breaking down of the nuclear family, or the intact family, is probably the single biggest unrecognized crisis that this country faces, and the boy crisis that has resulted from that.
We're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. Again, he's the author of the book called The Boy Crisis. He's done an incredible amount of research here. We've had him on the show once before, and it was just a very, very well received. Got a lot of feedback on this on the interview we did last time, Dr. Farrell. You mentioned the Gillette ad. I mean, if there's anything that really I think should alarm us, it's how a company whose customers are men. I mean, speaking of fathers, I mean, it was my dad that first taught me how to shave. You know what I mean? I remember that. And so you're taking a product that represents men. That is the razor or the men's razor for facial hair, which is something that is generally specific to men. And they use it as an opportunity to tear men down. And somewhere in the corporate world, some ad agency was able to convince them to do this. I find that just absolutely alarming, because we now have people, making ads that are clearly outside their economic interests, all for some sort of, some sort of altruism that the majority of the country rejects.
Yes, and it's a blindness to, of the ad creators for the Gillette ad to understand that so many people in liberal circles don't realize that there are other people that think differently than they do. And so the attitude of males are all part of the patriarchy, they all have male privilege and power, has been so deeply ingrained in liberal communities and the advertising community that there is not an understanding that other people could be offended by this, and that there could be, and that maybe if you are going to be critiquing men and saying yes, you want to have men to be the best they can be, you can acknowledge that some of the toxicity, what is called toxicity, that's involved in masculinity, is as a result of the sacrifices that men have been required to make. When you create heroic intelligence, that can be at odds with health intelligence. When our son goes out and he wants to play football, and we know that if he is a great football player, the good news is that he'll have extremely good discipline. He'll have a great deal of ability to make decisions very quickly based on every single play changing. He will learn a series of skill sets that are extraordinary, which are all skill sets that are built toward having heroic intelligence. But he also may get a concussion. He may also be depressed and have a drug overdose. He may also be involved with becoming overweight. These are all outcomes of playing football, and they're all outcomes of denying what one needs to deny oneself in order to make a sacrifice that is part of being a hero. So being a hero is complex, and if we had a different message and we said, for millions of years, we have needed men to die in war, to be disposable, so our country wouldn't be under Nazi rule, and yet now we have the privilege to be able to help our sons take care of themselves as well as take care of the country. And if we have a dialogue about what's the balance between encouraging my son to learn all the skills that come from playing football versus the challenges to his health that he may have in concussions and spinal cord injuries and obesity and opiate addiction. And so where do I want to find that balance, and who is my son, and what is his personality, and how important it is to have a dad in the picture to help guide him with a strong but sensitive and loving role model to be that best man that he can be. This is a discussion we should be having.
You raise an interesting point, Dr. Farrell, about men, about being disposable in terms of history, in terms of fighting wars. And so it just dawned on me, as a father, let me ask you this. As a father, or are men supposed to prepare their sons for war? I mean, it isn't, and if we're not doing that, meaning the potential, and if you're not doing that, and as a society right now, we're rejecting those things that make boys men. Doesn't that make us weaker as a country in terms of looking at the prospect of having to go to war someday?
It does, it may and it may not, meaning that if we're preparing our boys to fight in war, and there is a war that comes up and it requires the type of fighting that wars have particularly had in the past, then not having a significant percentage of people, men and women, prepared for that is bad. Now, but liberals deny that there is a difference between men and women that isn't just social construction. But if we look at all of history and animals and birds and insects, we see that there's a very strong biological difference between men and women. There's an overlap. There are some women who are potentially prepared to be in the fighting in war, and there are some men who are going to be naturally oriented toward being gay, and there are other men who will be sort of artists. And so it's important that as parents that we not just force our children into a mold of you have to be this or you have to be that based on your sex, but it's also important for people to understand that 90% of men and women are going to have certain propensities that are different from each other.
Yeah.
That that come from their biological starting points.
Yeah, when I say prepare for war, what I really just mean is if you're strong, if you can, you attempt to protect or take care of the weak. And typically, in America, when we fight wars, that's the reason we're doing it. It's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. But when I say, raise your son or, prepare them for that potential sacrifice, obviously you hope that it never comes to that. But I don't even think. I guess my point would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the one that's done the science on this or done all the research on this, is so much of what I just talked about, preparing for war or a potential conflict or having to lay down your life, that really is just something that happens naturally between a lot of father and sons generally. Like you said, there is some overlap, but it seems that we're trying to tear that down by saying that we got to fight the patriarchy, and this is all oppressive towards women. And, there's a lot of women that don't feel that way. There's a lot of women that want a strong, let's just go ahead and say stereotypical male. They actually find that attractive.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The great majority of women do find that attractive. And, you don't see, and particularly if you take that protector role and not only put it in the disposability area. Women, then you definitely, it's very rare that a woman who's planning to have children will say, gee, I want to, this guy on the unemployment line is very sensitive and sweet. I think I'll choose him to be my husband. Almost always, if they're reading I'm okay, you're okay on the unemployment line, he's not eligible. And, and if he's earning less than she does, and she projects that he will always be earning less than she does, very few women are interested in marrying that type of man once they're interested in having children. It's the male-female role. Really, we hear, for example, that from liberals that men have male privilege because they earn more money than women do. They don't understand that men do not earn more money than women do. Dads earn more money than moms do. It is only when men become fathers and women become mothers that the male is far more likely, the dad is far more likely to focus on earning in the workplace, and so therefore he quits his job as a musician or as an artist or even as a teacher and becomes an administrator instead, or quits education altogether and becomes an insurance salesperson. And he does that, and as he does that, he earns more money, but he's giving up his passion to do something that he feels will help his children have a better life than he has or had. And so it's not understanding this these core differences between men and women, of which there's a lot of overlap, and we should allow for that overlap, and it's healthy when we do. But when boys, what I've found in doing the research for the boy crisis is when boys do not have a father to be involved in helping them get postponed gratification, have boundary enforcement that dads tend to do. When there's a lack of boundary enforcement, no matter what we want our boy to be, whether it's a soldier, a breadwinner, or an artist, the boy can't achieve that, because without the boundary enforcement, he doesn't learn how to do what he's required to do. And when he's required to do something, then he gets the discipline to do it, and whether that is the discipline to be an artist, a writer, or a soldier, that's all part of the same process of discipline.
Yeah. Wow. Again, we're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis. You should check it out at Amazon. I'm wondering if there's going to be a backlash against this man-hating that is being crammed down our throats by certain institutions, entertainment, Hollywood, the far left. Are you familiar with Generation Z? I've been doing some research on the generation that's after the millennials, and it seems like they're kind of revolting in their own way. It's almost like they're the counterculture now. Yes.
I think, as I'm sure you know too, all human beings, we have a part of our brain called the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone, and that part of our brain is very receptive. It gives us a lot of dopamine, the feel-good drug in our brain, whenever somebody compliments us or whenever we agree with somebody, we have a chord with them, and it makes us very fearful of disagreeing with somebody. So, and that's part of what creates a pendulum swinging in one direction or the other. And we've had this pendulum swinging toward toxicity, to the blaming of men, and the calling of almost everything that's masculine toxic. And now, and particularly in liberal circles and in universities and in the social science departments in universities and schools of social work, you cannot be in those schools and say good things about men without getting a huge amount of negative feedback. When the American Psychological Association recently put out their guidelines, which was very critical of men and traditional masculinity, when I participated and spoke with that group at one point, the group that created those guidelines, and there was no room for saying anything positive about men without getting criticized, without being called sexist, without basically being called a name. And so we've moved the pendulum very heavily in that direction, and yet we tend to move it back for brief periods of times if we have a 9/11, and we see that 99% of the first responders are men, people willing to risk their lives. But even when we have firefighters being almost 100% men and about 75% of them being volunteer firefighters, we see thank you firefighters, but we don't hear a larger discussion of how wonderful it is to have men be willing to sacrifice their lives to save the lives of strangers. Men saving our homes, building our bridges, building our lands, building our skyscrapers, building our infrastructure, being the ones that create the sewers. When we flush the toilet, we're able to get rid of our waste, which wasn't always true a couple hundred years ago. And we have privileges now through technology and other things that are created at a 90% plus level by men, and we're not acknowledging them at all.
And bringing this full circle.
How entitled.
Yeah, bringing this full circle, I mean, to the Covington High School kids on the steps, with this grown man coming up to this child, and yet they didn't actually do anything, you know what I mean? They actually behaved really well compared to maybe how some other people might react in that situation.
Absolutely. Those boys should have been the subject of national respect and pride. My guess is that they restrained themselves in part. I will bet that most of those boys had intact families with fathers and mothers where they're able to learn the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive, And that's really, one of the great contributions of fathers and mothers working together to raise their children. And, we really have, I was part of the feminist movement at the beginning before I saw some of its demonization of men and the undermining of the family. But, part of feminism all along was the advocacy, as with Lenin, with destroying the nuclear family, assuming that the nuclear family was about men being in power and oppressing women, which it was completely not that at all. It was about men risking their lives to protect women and children, just like moms risk their lives to bear children and to raise them. Parenting was never about privilege and power. It was always about making sacrifices in order to have our children have a better life than we have.
Dr. Warren Farrell, it is always a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your wisdom, sir, and I hope you have a great day.
It's a pleasure talking to you, too.
All righty, folks, we're going to take a break and be back here in just a moment. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
In 30 states across the country, we have a small program here in Arkansas, the Succeed Scholarship Program, that's limited to students with moderate to severe disabilities. And so there's been a push. Jim Dotson and others have been pushing for expanding access to school choice for larger populations of families in Arkansas. So, I mean, everything is very predictable if you don't have school choice, right? I mean, every kid goes to their residentially zoned school. So that makes planning easy for people working in the public school system. But sometimes that creates a situation where a child just isn't getting what they need and parents aren't getting what they want from their schools because one size really doesn't fit all in a child's education. So, I mean, I think a lot of the pushback from the public school system is just, because
determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, here we are broadcasting from the Answer Studios, 101.1 FM, The Answer. We really appreciate them hosting us. That's going to kind of wrap it up for the first hour. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be going over what happened in the Senate Public Health Committee yesterday. Senator Jason Rapert doing an amazing job, an excellent job, putting up his bill that if, in the event Roe versus Wade is overturned, would ban abortion in Arkansas, except in cases where the life of the mother is at risk. It would also, and we'll talk about this because they talked about it in committee, in the event of rape, it would not ban the chemical drugs that can be used that are called contraceptives. If you go to the hospital or something like that after a terrible situation, a tragedy like a rape, it would not ban those types of drugs. But this bill, it got through the committee, and there was just so much emotion involved yesterday, folks. I can't even describe it. You had to be there. Even so, we'll show you the video and let you listen to the audio when we come back. One more hour of Conduit News Radio coming your way next.
Talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 1230 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
It will disrupt their ability to predict, how many kids are coming and things like that.
Yeah, and that's going to make it hard to budget. Do you think any of it is taken personally sometimes?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I suppose, you want, but in choice environments I've studied, Paul, like Milwaukee. Milwaukee was where the original private school choice program was launched in 1990. When I went in there with my research team and evaluated that program and other school choice programs in Milwaukee, the superintendent came up to me and said, "We know school choice is here to stay. We want parents to choose our schools." So I thought that was a very healthy attitude by him, that everybody should go to the school they want, and I want them to want my schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great attitude. And I'm sure that there are some Arkansas superintendents, who believe the same way. I don't think anybody is willing to say that, our educational system, our public educational system is where it needs to be. We are getting, bad results in some cases. And then at the same time, there are really good schools out there as well. It just seems to me that anytime school choice is talked about, there seems to be like a resistance. We don't even have teachers unions, in Arkansas, but it seems to me that there is a resistance to it because they think it's somehow going to be a negative thing on the public schools. But in reality, I think competition eventually is going to help everybody out.
And there's lots of research to support that, Paul. There have been 29 studies of what happens to the kids who stay in traditional public schools when private school choice is launched or expanded. And 28 out of the 29 find that their test scores go up. And they find that the schools communicate more effectively with parents when they face competition, that they launch new programs to meet the needs of students, and test scores go up. So, the families who stay in public schools, because those are working for them, they don't have anything to fear from choice. And I think ultimately, the people working in the public school system don't really have anything to fear from choice. It's change, and change is always a little frightening. But if they have an effective school, they're delivering results for parents. Those parents aren't going to leave.
So again, we're talking with Dr. Patrick Wolf, professor in 21st century, chair in school choice, professor of education at the University of Arkansas. So in your experience, when a state begins to adopt school choice, does it most of the time happen in increments? Are there any examples of a massive reform all at once? What typically happens?
Sure, that's a great question, Paul. Typically, like 3 to 5% of the eligible students participate in the first few years of a private school choice program. And then it grows kind of, modestly from there. Basically, parents have a certain wisdom. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if everything's going fine for their child in their neighborhood public school, they'll stay. But if it's not working out, that's where private school choice gives them new options that can really help their kids.
So it's really just more, when we say it just kind of is going to depend on the parents. If you give them the option, then it's going to be up to, are there a lot of underperforming schools? So, if there were a lot, then maybe you would assume that there might be more parents that are going to start taking advantage of the freedom that they have. One of the points that Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin made in his articles, how right now the status quo is something that we really would reject in any other aspect of our life. So if you could only go to the grocery stores that were in these, kind of arbitrary geographical boundaries, and maybe they're not arbitrary because, there's city boundaries, but, if you could only go to Walmart because it's the only one in your locale and you couldn't go to Kroger, we would reject that outright, but we accept it when it comes to the public education system. I thought that was a good point.
Yes, choice is a big part of our economy, of our society. It's valued as an American principle. And what's interesting, Paul, is in education,
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Broadcasting from the Answer Studios in Little Rock in our continuing coverage of the 92nd General Assembly. So glad that you guys are with us today. We've been teasing this all last hour, and we have to get to it. Yesterday in the Senate Public Health Committee, Senator Jason Rapert got his bill that would ban abortion in Arkansas unless the life of the mother is at risk, but only after Roe versus Wade is overturned, meaning if Roe versus Wade is reversed, which many people expect it to be, especially if Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the next justice to be replaced, then that would mean once that happens, Arkansas law goes into effect immediately. It's called an abortion trigger law. Other states have done it. Senator Jason Rapert doing an excellent job. Thankfully, because of the transparency effort, we have the audio and the video that we can share with you. And I'm going to play this for you because it was an incredible moment. It was filled with emotion. It was a long time coming. And that's an understatement when you think about the millions of babies that have been killed, the 3,000 or so babies that were killed last year in the state of Arkansas. This was a debate that needs to be had. This is really, folks, it is the issue of our time. And because this has never been done before on the scale that it's being done right now. 60 million plus babies since 1974. It is incredibly horrific. It is a genocide. And here it is. This is Senator Rapert presenting his bill yesterday in the Senate Public Health Committee, and the discussion ensued afterwards. Here he is.
A long history of legislation and a constitutional amendment even that advocates the protection of unborn human babies. The only thing that has prevented Arkansas from banning abortions altogether is the Roe v. Wade decision of 1973 and related decisions, which is often cited by federal courts when they strike down pro-life legislation around the country. Legal scholars now believe that with new judges being added to the U.S. Supreme Court, there is a very good chance that Roe v. Wade will soon be overturned and the authority of states to regulate and prohibit abortion in their own states will be restored. SB 149 is what has been termed a trigger law, meaning that when and if Roe v. Wade is overturned and the authority to regulate abortion is restored to the individual states, or a U.S. constitutional amendment were to be passed doing the same, that Arkansas would immediately prohibit abortion in our state except when necessary to save the life of a mother in a medical emergency. That exception is the standard of national right to life, and that's why that exception is in the bill. You'll see, if you want to draw your attention to the findings, upon discussion with some of the legal scholars, especially many of the scholars that have been a part of what you have seen out publicly called the moral outcry. The moral outcry is a petition-driven movement actually applying to the Supreme Court itself. And this is part of why I've got the findings here in the bill. And it's to illustrate that there's a grave injustice that's going on that is actually ignoring the most fundamental civil right that any of us have, which is the right to life. Over 60 million little babies in our country have been precluded from that simple, but yet the most humane right that we have, simply to be born. And what happened is over time, as the U.S. Supreme Court has actually made decisions that overturned some prior precedent when they realized there was a grave injustice. I bring your attention, it starts there on page 2 of your bill. It is time for the United States Supreme Court to redress and correct the grave injustice and the crime against humanity which is being perpetuated by their decisions in Roe, Doe, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. The U.S. Supreme Court committed a grave injustice and a crime against humanity in the Dred Scott decision by denying personhood to a class of human beings, which was our fellow Americans who are African Americans. The United States Supreme Court also committed a grave injustice and a crime against humanity by upholding the separate but equal doctrine, Plessy versus Ferguson, which withdrew legal protection from a class of human beings who were persons under the U.S. Constitution, our fellow African Americans. A crime against humanity occurs when a government withdraws legal protection from a class of human beings, resulting in severe deprivation of their rights up to and including death. In Brown versus Board of Education, the U.S. Supreme Court corrected that grave injustice and crime against humanity created in Plessy versus Ferguson by overruling and abolishing a 58-year-old separate but equal doctrine, thus giving equal rights to African Americans. When you look at this, under the doctrine of stare decisis, the 3 abortion cases mentioned in the subdivisions above meet the test for when a case should be overturned by the United States Supreme Court because of significant changes in facts or laws, including without limitation the following. The cases have not been accepted by scholars, judges, and the American people, as witnessed by the fact that these cases are still the most intensely controversial cases in American history at the present time. New scientific advances have demonstrated since 1973 that life begins at the moment of conception, which, by the way, our Arkansas Constitution acknowledges that, and that was voted in by the people in Amendment 68. And also, the scientific evidence shows that a child in a woman's womb is a human being. Scientific evidence and personal testimonies document the massive harm that abortion causes to women. Just for the sake.
Okay, this is Senator Jason Rapert, and he's in the public health, doing an excellent job. But what he is saying here is so important. He's saying that over our history, no one likes to admit this because they like to think the Supreme Court is the end-all, be-all, and we don't have a say in anything. But what he's saying is throughout our history, the Supreme Court is wrong sometimes. Sometimes the Supreme Court in our history is inhumane, and they make decisions that are unconscionable today. He mentions Dred Scott. Says you're not a person under the Constitution if you have black skin, and we have now we have the Democrats still the party of slavery in many regards because they're still in the business of deciding who is a person and who's not. I've made that point many times throughout the years. I'm so glad that Senator Rapert also has put that in his bill, saying, "Listen," and or Plessy versus Ferguson, or Brown versus Board of Education, Dred Scott. All these things are the Supreme Court doing things that we now find to be morally reprehensible as a society. And abortion is the same thing, and it's in that category, and it will be in that category in the future. Go ahead, Joe. Continue with Senator Rapert's testimony.
Not being able to bring them, I have access to over 4,000 written testimonies that have been introduced in court cases across this land from ladies that have actually had abortions themselves and suffered the trauma that comes additionally after having that procedure. The laws in all 50 states have now changed through safe haven laws to eliminate all burden of child care from women who do not want to care for a child. Your committee just did a wonderful thing a few days ago when you allowed the safe haven law to be upgraded here to include boxes where we could actually receive those children safely. And I think Senator Hickey had an amendment to that to make sure that they're properly monitored. Public attitudes favoring adoption have created a culture of adoption in the United States, with many families waiting long periods of time to adopt newborn infants. Before the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade, Arkansas had already enacted prohibitions on abortions under sections that are quoted here in the findings for you. Arkansas Constitution Amendment 68 states the policy of Arkansas is to protect the life of every unborn child from conception until birth, and that public funds shall not be used to pay for any abortion except to save the life of the mother. Arkansas passed the Arkansas Heartbeat Protection Act. 6 years ago, in this very room, was where the Heartbeat Protection Act started. When we did that and passed that act, it actually obviously had the 12-week ban struck down by a federal court. But what was left in place with that was the informed consent provisions. And I've had a discussion with several members about my experience with that. In the state of Arkansas, right now, due to our informed consent provisions, we're saving lives, but we're not saving all lives. And what I'm asking you to do in SB 149 is at the very moment we get authority, we will save lives. I've had a couple people bring up the exception issue. I understand that. These are serious issues. But I will tell you that my own experience has brought me to understand that I can't arbitrarily draw a line. I was in a restaurant in Conway, Arkansas about 2 years ago. I finished with my family, Mr. Chairman, and saw a lady coming across the floor pushing a stroller, hurriedly across the floor. She approached me and my family, and she stated to me that she wanted to meet me and was appreciative that I'd stop for a moment. And I greeted her, and she says, "I want to introduce you to Duncan." I look down on the stroller, and I see a little boy about 6 months old. He's sucking on a pacifier, had a little bow tie on. I said, "Well, he's a cute little guy." And then when I looked at her, she caught my eye again. She said, "Sir, he's alive because of your heartbeat bill." With that, I really didn't have words. And it's been a while that I could tell this story and actually get it without choking up a bit. I said, "Ma'am, you'll have to explain it to me." I said, "First of all, it's not my bill. The Arkansas legislature of 2013 passed that bill. And they're the ones that are really responsible. This is a law for the state of Arkansas." She said, "Well, let me explain to you." She said, "I'm the adopted mother. Duncan's mother was raped, and she took the morning after pill. It didn't work. That was Duncan's first survival. She then appeared at the abortion clinic down the road from where we sit here, just 10 or 15 minutes. She was prepping for her abortion. They performed the ultrasound, which the Heartbeat Protection Act does require, and they detected a heartbeat. And they told her of the statistical probability that her baby would actually make it to full term. With that knowledge, she said, "I can't do this," and I put the baby up for adoption. She told me that story. I thanked her for that. It's the first time I'd ever seen someone that told me that. And absolutely, members, what you do here absolutely has changed lives in that particular situation, and it's changed lives in other situations. So when you look at the history of what Arkansas has done, we passed Amendment 68. We even passed here, after the heartbeat bill, Senator Jim Hendren ran a bill which changed our fetal homicide law. We used to only recognize it at 12 weeks that there was the infant's life. Now, the infant fetal homicide law in Arkansas recognizes that from the moment of conception, in a mother's womb. So what you see is time and time and time again here in Arkansas, we have stood up for the rights of unborn children, of human life in a mother's womb. To bring this to a point on this bill, 4 other states currently have in place legislation that would ban abortion in their states if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned. That's North Dakota, South Dakota, Mississippi, and Louisiana. These are commonly referred, as I said, as these abortion trigger laws. The state of New York recently expanded abortion policy. You heard that mentioned last night in the president's address. In their state, they now allow abortions to be performed right up until the time of birth in certain situations. One of the stated reasons that New York took, which really took me off of my feet the day that they signed their bill, was the day I filed this bill. And they stated that New York took this step with the anticipation of a possible overturned decision of Roe by the U.S. Supreme Court in the near future. Vermont is also pursuing legislation that further expands abortion policy in their state. The state of Arkansas is clearly a pro-life state. Our citizens, our legislature have spoken clearly time and time again, and we should and must protect the lives of innocent unborn babies. The law clearly allows Arkansas to take steps right now to prohibit abortion in our state if and when our authority to regulate or prohibit abortion is restored. SB 149 establishes the will of the people of this state. If we are fortunate enough to have the U.S. Supreme Court make a decision that would return the authority, all 135 legislators are being given an opportunity to clearly articulate the humanity of human beings and voice our will to protect and honor human life by passing this bill. As President Donald Trump said last night, after calling out the offensive expansion of abortion in New York and comments made by Virginia Governor Northam, and also even calling for Congress to ban late-term abortions himself, he said this, and this closes it for me, and it's where I stand. Let us reaffirm a fundamental truth that all children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God. Members, I ask you to vote for SB 149, the Arkansas Human Life Protection Amendment, and make sure that we have the will of the people ready at the very moment that we're given the authority to ban abortion in our state. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Stop. All right.
Are there any questions from
Jason, that was entire presentation yesterday before the House or the Senate Public Health Committee. It did pass. It passed out with an overwhelming voice vote. There was no votes. There was no dissenting votes. And it was just incredible. You know, I want to say something here. We're going to take a break and come back and listen to a little bit more of the questions. But I want to say, in light of the fact New York State is doing what they're doing and the state of Virginia is doing what they're doing this in preparation for Roe versus Wade being overturned. Arkansas is doing this in preparation for Roe versus Wade being overturned. But we're taking two completely opposite paths. And I'm so thankful right now that I live in Arkansas instead of New York or Virginia. We're going to take a break. Back in a moment.
Pre-K all the way through college. We have consumer choice at the bookends, but not in the middle. So pre-K, parents have tons of choices for pre-K, and government supports whichever provider they select, even if it's a private or religious provider. And similarly, at the college level, students have a lot of choice, and government grants and loans support whatever institution they choose to go to, even if it's private or religious. It's just in the K-12 window where it seems to be controversial to have choices for what education organization is going to deliver that vital service to your child.
Oh, you know, I never thought about it. On the bookends, you have choice, but in the middle, you don't have a choice. That is pretty fascinating. So yeah, that's so. You know, I think if a lot of people kind of heard it phrased that way, maybe they would feel different. I definitely know with parents, you know.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
So afterward, after Senator Rayford got through with his bill, it was a good day yesterday at the Arkansas legislature. This was one of the biggest reasons why, because his bill, his pro-life bill, passed out of this committee. There was some discussion about rape because there is in the bill an exception for an abortion if the life of the mother is at risk. Again, he said that is the national right to life standard. But then, of course, you have, well, what about rape? Well, it was brought out, it was painfully brought out eventually, that the law only applies when you can detect medically that a pregnancy has happened, which is like 3 weeks. And so because of that, so-called contraceptives like Plan B or chemical abortions, things like that, chemical drugs or chemicals, that, you know, if somebody were to be raped and they go to the hospital, this would not preclude them from being able to use those types of methods to make sure pregnancy doesn't happen. And eventually it came up that those drugs are only able to work within 5 days of a sexual encounter. So just so you know, I mean, and is that perfect situation? Are there people that may not get there within 5 days? Absolutely. But there was what it was said in the committee, 3,000 babies in Arkansas killed last year for with abortion. You know what? Let's just get to the questions right after his testimony. We don't have a lot of time. We got about 5 more minutes of this. Let's go ahead and click play, Joe, right there, and let's get to, I think, is it Senator Caldwell that had the first question? Go ahead whenever you're ready, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to point out one thing, Senator Rayford. I know there's been a lot of discussion about not having the exemption for rape and incest in here, but I do want to point out on page 4, beginning on line 31, it says, this section does not prohibit the sale, use, prescription, administration of a contraceptive measure, drug, or chemical if the contraceptive measure, drug, or chemical is administered before the time when a pregnancy could be determined through conventional medical testing. Basically, that means that if you had rape or incest and you knew it immediately and were treated at a hospital, that you could be treated with some chemical or device to prevent a pregnancy from occurring. Is that correct?
If that's allowable under the language,
yep.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, if you did have now, if that rape or incest occurred or was detected 6 months down the road, obviously there's no provision for.
Well, there would be no exception. I think
that's correct. We agree on that. But for so many of us, me included, if a rape occurred on Friday night, reported on Saturday, then there would be some measure to try to prevent pregnancy from occurring, based on this language that I just read.
Well, and I'm going to try to make sure I'm looking at the same language. Tell me which line you're looking so that we don't get a confusion here.
Okay, page 4. You start on line 31. This section does not, and then you jump to line 34. It does not prohibit the sale, use, prescription, or administration of a contraceptive measure, drug, or chemical if the contraceptive measure, drug, or chemical is administered before the time when a pregnancy could be determined through conventional medical testing, which means if you were raped on Friday night, you could not determine that you were pregnant on Saturday, so they could use medical efforts to prevent a pregnancy.
Based on that language, I would say you're right on that assessment, sir.
There you go. So not only what we kind of brought out, not only is there an exception in case the life of the mother, but there's technically is still an exemption for rape. Now the window is smaller, but there's still an exemption for it. So I just want you to understand something. This bill in Arkansas, the people who are leftists in Arkansas are the ones still on a sinking ship, and they're crazy. Let me just be perfectly clear with you. They're nuts. They're crazy. That's Republican Senator Ron Caldwell asking a great question. And what he did was bring out, essentially, some ammunition to use against what the left is going to say, which is that you don't care about women and blah, 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 whatever. The fact of the matter is the bill has a written exemption in case the life of the mother. And in the case of rape, again, it's not going to get, I mean, not every rape, I'm sure, is going to be reported within 5 days. But at some point, you have to understand that this is about stopping genocide and saving lives. And Roe versus Wade, the societal consequences are, I guarantee you, the judges had no idea what it was going to be as bad as it is. More choice. Nobody's going to say no to more choice most of the time. I think those who are, the biggest problem that I had is I was covering this last year or 2 years ago when Arkansas was attempting to make some small reforms in this way. We did have a lot of people, teachers. My wife, is a teacher now. Well, now she's a stay-at-home mom, but they were hearing this stream of information that was starting at the top of their school district and going into the teachers' lounges. And they were coming out, and some of these people hadn't even actually read the bill, and some of the superintendents themselves hadn't read the bill, but they were just putting up this allergy, if you will, these defenses saying we've got to stop this. And of course they were successful. And so I'm very optimistic this time. I hope that there are, Republicans and Democrats alike that are going to say, you know what, we need to do something. We need to give people an opportunity, if they want it, to go to school where they want to go to school, in spite of their zip code.
Yeah, Paul, the polling shows that more than 2/3 of Arkansans support the idea of providing tax-funded scholarships for parents to customize their child's education through private tuition, tutoring, special ed therapies and such. And that's the proposal that the advocates are putting together for this session. It has, widespread popular support in the state by voters, by residents, and we'll see if they can get it through the legislature.
Are there other instances across the country? Are there any instances where someone's tax dollars actually follow their child to what school they want to go to?
Not explicitly, not in the way you might want. I mean, there's a certain logic to that, right? Because we fund education for the kids, not for the buildings. So why wouldn't the money be, directly associated with the child? Now, it is kind of indirectly because public schools are funded based on enrollment levels, previous year enrollment levels. But, there's a bit of a lag before that happens when a child switches schools. And also, nearly half of the funding for schools is outside of that foundational formula. So it's going to schools and school districts regardless of how many students they have. So you don't really quite have that idea of student-based funding where the money quickly and completely follows the child when they switch schools.
Well, the reason I wanted to ask that is because now, personally, I think that would be a great idea. I think that would really be, competition and competing for customers.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Good morning to everybody out there listening. We thank you so much for being with us today. Got a special treat for you on the line. We have the Arkansas Speaker of the House, Speaker Matthew Shepard. Speaker Shepard, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Glad to be with you.
Yes, sir. Let me just start by saying, because I haven't talked to you since your speech that started the 92nd General Assembly. I really appreciated your speech. I really thought it struck a tone of humility and mission for the public good and the people of Arkansas. So thank you so much for that delivery.
Well, thank you. It's always special when you get to address the House, and particularly on an occasion like that. And I really just tried to speak from the heart and just remind people that, we may have differences of opinion, but ultimately it's really not about us. It's really about serving the people of Arkansas. And so that's what I tried to remind not just the members, but to remind myself. And honestly, as every day goes by, I try and reflect on some of those thoughts as I serve the people of Arkansas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Again, we're talking with the Speaker of the House of the State of Arkansas, Matthew Shepard, this morning. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tax reform. Yesterday it was good news. The day before, I was wondering what was going on, in the state Senate. But the governor's clean, standalone income tax bill yesterday passed out of the Arkansas Senate, got the 75% threshold that they needed. And so now we're going to look to the House, and let's assume that's going to get through committee. But everybody wants to know, where are we, or will we get to that 75% threshold, that 75 vote threshold out of 100 state representatives?
We're certainly going to try. We know going into this is from day one. We know with the supermajority threshold that's very tough, let alone on an issue like this that has a lot of attention. I think we've got a great opportunity. There's clearly more work that needs to be done. And so now that it's out of the Senate and we have the bill here, over the next few days, that's going to be a top priority for me, is visiting with my fellow House colleagues and discussing the bill and understanding, if anybody has objections, what are those objections? I feel like that the vast majority, when we've talked about this, and I've already had a number of conversations on this, so I think I think we can make the case as to why this is the right thing to do. But we also have members that, it may not be so much about the tax cut. They want to know, what are we going to do on highways, or what are we going to do, what are we doing with regard to education? So as you know, so many times these issues can become somewhat interrelated, and we're going to work very hard to see this thing through.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly what, according to Talk Business and Politics, they reported that one of the reasons Senator Bill Sample didn't vote the first time, and he also wasn't there yesterday, was because he was trying to get something on highways. And I've heard this from a few people around the Capitol, that the legislature, the individual members, they seem to be negotiating a lot more than maybe, say, past sessions. Would you agree with that?
I'm not aware of course, it's just now to the House, and I'm not aware of any kind of deals that have been struck on this bill. And what I've told my members is that, we want to vote it up or down on the merits of the bill. I'm very interested in highways, and that's something that I'm certainly working towards some type of legislation that can make, myself and others understand that we're going to do something about highways. But as far as this bill, my focus and my message has been, let's take the vote, let the chips fall where they may. I mean, this is a tax cut, and for the vast majority of my colleagues, I think this is something that if they're just evaluating on the face of the bill, I think they can and should be supportive of. But we'll see. I mean, this is the legislative process, and each vote is very important. But my desire is to just take a straight up or down vote on the merits of the bill itself.
We're talking this morning with the Arkansas Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard. We're very thrilled to have you on, sir. Let me ask you this. Are you getting any questions from members about what the tax burden, the overall tax burden on the people of Arkansas will be at the end? Because like you said, it's a great tax cut bill, this income tax bill that the governor has put forward, bringing it from 6.9 to 5.9. But then we do have highways. Then we do have other individual bills that are going to come before. And are there any members, or are you concerned of trying to keep that overall tax burden either the same or hopefully lower when it's all said and done?
Well, it's obviously a concern, and really, in terms of my focus, so much of it is about the things that we pass out here. My desire on highways is I've felt that we need to move some general revenue funding towards highways, because I think that's important to let the people of Arkansas know that highways are a priority to us. And you'll recall that I believe 8 years ago we referred out that half-cent sales tax. And, I know that there's a lot of discussion, and, there probably is a pretty good chance that something else gets referred out. But, I personally feel like we've got to show that we've done more with what we already have, and that we've prioritized the highway funding issue. Clearly, it's always a concern when you look to where are we at, and ultimately over my 8 years here, we cut a lot of taxes during that time. And I look back to my first session, and we as a Republican minority, we helped to push through $35 million in tax cuts, and that was like the biggest thing in the world at that time. And now here we are a few years later, and we've cut several hundred million more in taxes. But yeah, so we're obviously very aware of kind of the big picture here, and it's a very fluid situation. The highway issue is so challenging. The need is so great, but we're also trying to, at least for myself, I'm trying to be as responsive as possible to the people of Arkansas, and we want to try and put forth a good plan that people can feel comfortable with.
I'm glad you brought up general revenue for highways, because I think a lot of people look to the other states that do that, and they think that's a good idea as well. Then there's also some people that look at the idea of, like, say, used car sales, and that money being dedicated for roads. Matter of fact, State Representative John Payton, he's got a bill, HB 1342, that would cut the sales tax on used vehicles, which is pretty interesting. It's I personally, Speaker Shepard, I'm excited with the different ideas just generally that are out there of legislators trying to say, well, what about this? What about that? I think that's really healthy. Yeah,
and I'm certainly think that's a great part of the legislative process. Is I think my style, I have my opinions on things, and obviously am trying to provide some leadership to the House, and work with the governor and the Senate to help guide us through this session and get to a place where we can do the people's work and go home and know we did a good job for the people of Arkansas. But one of the things that I do like about the legislative process is it allows everyone to throw their ideas out there. And, as I said, the first day of session, sometimes people can think, well, why is this being proposed? Why is that being proposed? Sometimes things can be kind of dismissed. But as I said, the first day, when I look out there, I look at each member and I recognize that they represent 30,000 people. And so when proposals are brought forth, there's a lot of them that obviously I may be very supportive of. There's maybe some that I'm supportive of, but maybe I don't feel like with our, where we're at from a fiscal standpoint, maybe it's just not doable at this time. But even on those things that I'm like, why is this being proposed? I also try and step back and remember, hey, each legislator, each House member represents a very significant number of Arkansans. And so I think that's one of the great things and the beauty of the legislative process.
Let's talk about ethics a little bit. Moving on for tax reform. A lot of the confidence, I guess, because of what's been in the headlines, because of corruption of public officials, of politicians, the people of Arkansas are kind of scratching their head and they're like, what's going on down there? Now, a lot of that has been more focused on the Senate side, right? But I think just generally, a lot of people are just, you guys are under their microscope now. And then, of course, we had, details in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, a couple weeks ago about, secret business partners connected with nursing homes and legislators, that was kind of concealed and everything else. So what do you think, or what needs to be done to restore the confidence, that the people need to have in their government?
Well, I think that, let me first say that I think the people that are serving here in the House and the Senate, they, I believe we've got a good group of legislators here that are trying to do the right thing. I think that as far as what can we do to to bolster and repair to the extent that maybe the legislature or state government as a whole, maybe to the extent it's been tarnished, is I think it's a combination of things. I think the transparency is a huge part of that. As you know, the House, we've streamed for a number of years, and we've expanded that streaming to include all committees. And I think that's valuable because oftentimes you may see it's, just know it came out of committee, that even with a roll call, you see yays and nays, but without the video, you're not going to know, well, who was making what arguments and who spoke up and what questions were asked. And so I think that's a big component of it, is just continuing to bolster that transparency. We're continuing to look at what other things can we do to improve and make the legislature more transparent, and also try and eliminate any shortfall that may exist, or any loophole, if you will, that may exist. For me, and I want to be very careful about what we do, because the vast majority of the things for which people have been are being prosecuted or have been convicted of are not really gray areas. I mean, it's don't take bribes and kickbacks, and those things are already obviously strictly prohibited and are subject to serious punishments. But I think that it's a matter of let's look, what do we have an issue? Is there a rule or piece of legislation that addresses that issue? And if so, we want to do so in a means that is clear, so that both members and the public know exactly what's expected and what the parameters of conduct are. We're continuing to look at some things. I mean, you probably saw there were a few pieces of legislation that were filed earlier this week, and then I'm on the House end. There's a few things that I'm looking at to try and maybe offer some rule changes on the House end that, in part, to be somewhat proactive, but also just to try and make sure that we've got clear parameters for our members. And then, I think, but ultimately, the key to this, it starts with each one of us. And, for me, whether I'm a legislator or not, I have a standard of conduct for myself and how I'm going to handle myself because, I don't want my reputation to be tarnished.
Yeah.
So for me, whether I'm a legislator or just back home practicing law, whatever the case may be, I'm holding myself to a high standard. I think each one of us has to hold ourselves to a similarly high standard. We have to be cognizant of the fact that this has been an issue. We need to try and avoid allowing ourselves to intentionally or unintentionally being put in situations that could call our conduct into question. But the final thing is, it really goes back voters. It really goes back to the voters that we need to support and elect individuals of high moral conduct and character, and that's where it starts. And that's really been my message as I've talked to different groups and organizations. Is that's an important component that we sometimes maybe we gloss over because we think, well, we're just going to support so-and-so because we think they have the same view as we do on this particular issue or whatever. I think we have to start with the question of looking at people's character and integrity from the very outset.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. It's been a pleasure, sir, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Paul.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Folks, that's Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard. We talked a little bit about tax reform, a little bit about ethics. We're going to take a break and reset here, regroup, and we'll be right back, actually, with State Representative John Payton. We're actually going to talk about his bill. That's why I mentioned it just now, because it's right here in front of me, HB 1342, a bill that would cut the sales tax on used vehicles. We'll see what he's thinking when it comes to this idea. Back in just a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed roller lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
And the customers are the students. But you're saying that that's not really the case. That's not what a lot of these school choice reforms are attempting to do. They're attempting to do different things that, don't hurt the funding source necessarily of the existing schools. Is that correct?
Yes, they're all funded with separate appropriations. So there's it's like launching a new program. Now, eventually, they save the state money because the scholarships tend to be about half the amount that the state spends on a child when they attend a traditional public school. So, in a sense, with some startup money from the state, there's a little bit of a cost to launch these programs, but then eventually, it catches up and they save money because they've got slightly lower enrollments in the more expensive traditional public schools because kids are going.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. And we can't do the show without you. It's the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. And now we're going to go live in the middle of Little Rock traffic. The commute of one Arkansas legislator to the Marble Palace. His name, State Representative John Payton. He's en route to the Capitol. John, how are you this morning, sir?
Good morning, Paul. Doing pretty good. Enjoying this Little Rock traffic right in front of the big church right now.
Oh, fantastic. Which one? You mean the 3 big churches?
The one up here where you hit Highway 30 to head across the river. We're going pretty slow right now, but so you get a live traffic report.
That's right. That's right. We go now to our live reporter, State Representative John Payton. Hey, so listen. So on the Conduit scorecard this week, there's a bill. It's your bill, and it is a good bill. It is supported. It's HB 1342, a sales tax cut on used vehicles. Tell us about why you think this is a good idea.
Well, and of course, it's not just me. I've talked to a lot of legislators. As a matter of fact, this morning the bill's being amended to add 26 co-sponsors, and that could have been even more. I didn't really push hard to get co-sponsors. I just gave everybody an opportunity, and and that many people actually wanted to come to me and get on. So, there's a lot of people that think that, lower priced automobiles, used cars, they're a necessity to most Arkansans if they're going to get a job and get to work. You got to have transportation, and that $300-$500 worth of sales tax could be going towards a down payment, or if you're paying cash for a vehicle, or help you get it. But it's so important that Arkansans, being a rural state, have transportation to and from work, and dependable transportation. So we currently exempt vehicles that are $4,000 and down, and I'm just trying to raise that exemption up to $7,500. And of course, we'd all love to see used cars not taxed at all, because it is a second, third, fourth taxation on the same vehicle. Vehicles change hands, 6 or 8 times in their lifetime, and we're taxing it so many times repeatedly, and just looking for a little bit of relief towards lower end, cheaper vehicles, for people on tight budgets, be able to get a job and have good, dependable transportation back and forth.
And they say that Republicans are only in it for rich people. Hey, this this sounds like a bill that is actually going to help, the middle class and below. So I think this is a really good idea. And, over at Conduit News, reading an article right now, this bill would result in less money flowing to state government and thus provide more economic freedom for Arkansans. And that's a true statement as well on this.
It would, and we're still waiting on the economic impact statement. It should be less than $10 million, maybe as low as $5 or $6 million on the economic impact. But the legislators that are co-sponsoring it, that we're putting an amendment on this morning to add them, they've done that, knowing that there's going to be an economic impact hit to the bottom line. And but we feel like it's the right thing to do on, something that is a necessity. It's not a luxury. And trying to give people a little tax relief.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's certainly important. So you're saying right now, if you buy a car that's $4,000 or less, you don't pay sales tax. But
actually, the law says under $4,000, so it has to be $39.99, or less. Yeah.
Okay. And so this bill would say, hey, let's raise that limit to less than $7,500.
Exactly. That's correct.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's a good idea, and it's clearly, shrinking the size of government. And so and I think that's why, it made the scorecard, and I wanted to have you on to talk about it. How do you think things are going down there so far?
Oh, I'm so excited. I mean, listening to your show this morning should just seal the deal. I mean, Senator Rapert's bill, that would confirm that Arkansas intends to stop abortion in every case possible, and looking forward to the day that Roe versus Wade gets overturned. And then having the speaker on, your interview with him was great. And, we complained for several months that they might bring forward a tax cut that had a zero revenue impact. And they didn't do that. They gave us a clean bill. We have a tax cut that's coming through already across the Senate, coming through House committee and onto the floor, hopefully, that we can vote on a clean bill. And, I've been down here since 2013, and one of my biggest complaints has been how they package things together and make you vote on the bad with the good. And so I feel like they've done the right thing here by giving us a clean bill to vote on.
That is really encouraging as well. I mean, I'm very encouraged by it. And you mentioned Senator Rapert. I've just got to talk. I was in that committee room yesterday, and I'm just going to tell you, it was emotional for me personally. I know it was emotional for Senator Rapert because I talked to him afterwards. And if not, and for everybody, Rose Mims, Jerry Cox, this is something that we have been fighting for a very, very long time. And now that there's, go ahead.
Well, Senator Rapert's been the tip of this spear. Yeah. And I mean, my hat's off to him. I really, really appreciate what he does. And he definitely is the brunt of a lot of attacks. And I really appreciate him being a social conservative and being the tip of that spear. So
yeah, I saw speaking of him getting attacked, there was some poster that got put up at Vino's in Little Rock of him with vampire teeth biting a baby, and there was blood everywhere. I think it's been taken down, but I mean, my goodness, what is wrong with the people on the left?
does that not just show poor taste? I mean, just a depravity there for somebody to create an image like that and put it up. It's sickening.
It really is. Hey, well, State Representative John Payton, be safe in the gridlock and the traffic. We appreciate the traffic report update and your update.
I'm on your side of the river now.
Okay, good. Well, we appreciate it. I'll see you down there. Okay, all righty, folks. State Representative John Payton, everybody. It's always great to have him on. It's always great to have you listening to the program. This has been Conduit News Radio and our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly here, broadcasting from the Answer Studios, 101.1 FM, The Answer. We're so glad that they decided to have us here, to host us here, to give us a space to broadcast. And we'll be heading to the Marble Palace soon, going to see what's going on. Big day today for the Patriots of Act 746, a resolution to clarify Arkansas as a constitutional carry state. And I'm certainly going to be in that committee meeting because I want to hear what is said. Folks, Arkansas, we'll see you tomorrow for Johnny Cash Friday. Be safe.